The rain fell in sheets as mourners gathered around the freshly dug grave. Catherine Webb stood there, 6 months pregnant, her face swollen from 3 days of crying. She clutched her 4-year-old daughter Emma's hand while the priest said final prayers over her mother's casket. That's when her husband Derek leaned close and whispered the words that would change everything. "I want a divorce. I've met someone else. You have 2 weeks to move out." At her mother's funeral, while carrying his child, in front of everyone. Catherine didn't know it yet, but Derek had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Because in exactly 3 hours, a lawyer would read her mother's will. And Derek was about to discover that the humble schoolteacher he'd always looked down on had secretly built a $500 million empire. This is the story of how one man's greed and cruelty cost him everything, and how karma delivered the most perfect revenge imaginable. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Whether you're in New York, London, Lagos, or Mumbai, we want to hear from you. Let's go back to the beginning, to understand how Catherine ended up married to a man who would divorce her at her own mother's funeral. 8 years earlier, 23-year-old Catherine Ross had just finished her master's degree in literature. She was working at a small publishing house in Manhattan, living in a tiny studio apartment, and sending money home to her mother in Connecticut every month. Her mother, Margaret Ross, was a high school English teacher who'd raised Catherine alone after her father died when she was 5. Derek Webb was 28, charming, and ambitious. He worked as a junior investment banker and had his eyes on climbing the corporate ladder as quickly as possible. When he met Catherine at a mutual friends party, he was immediately attracted to her intelligence and her gentle nature. Their courtship was whirlwind. Derek pursued Catherine relentlessly, showing up at her office with expensive coffees, taking her to fancy restaurants she could never afford on her salary, buying her gifts that made her uncomfortable with their price tags. "You deserve nice things," Derek would say when she protested. "Let me take care of you." Catherine's mother Margaret was skeptical from the start. When Catherine brought Derek home to meet her, Margaret watched him carefully over dinner. The way he talked about money constantly. The way he asked probing questions about what Margaret owned, whether she had investments, what her retirement looked like. After Derek left that evening, Margaret pulled Catherine aside. "Be careful with that one," she said quietly. "He's got dollar signs in his eyes." "Mom, that's not fair," Catherine protested. "He's just ambitious. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful." "Ambition is fine," Margaret replied. "But ambition that comes with looking down on people who have less is dangerous. I saw how he looked around this house, Catherine. Like he was pricing everything." But Catherine was in love, or what she thought was love at 23. She dismissed her mother's concerns as old-fashioned protectiveness. When Derek proposed after 6 months of dating, Catherine said yes despite her mother's reservations. They got married in a small ceremony. Derek's wealthy parents attended, barely hiding their disappointment that their son was marrying a girl from such a modest background. Catherine's mother came alone, wearing her best dress, smiling for her daughter's sake but with worry in her eyes. The early years of marriage weren't terrible, but they weren't the fairy tale Catherine had imagined either. Derek worked constantly, staying late at the office, traveling frequently for deals. Catherine gave birth to their daughter Emma 2 years into the marriage, and suddenly she was alone most of the time with a newborn baby. Derek loved Emma, but in a distant way. He'd come home late, kiss the baby's forehead while she slept, then complain about the toys cluttering their apartment or the crying that interrupted his work calls. "Can't you keep her quieter?" he'd ask. "I have important calls to make." "She's a baby, Derek. Babies cry." "Well, figure something out. I can't work like this." Catherine's mother came to visit frequently, helping with Emma, cooking meals, and noticing things that worried her. The way Derek spoke to Catherine like she was an employee, not a partner. The way he controlled their finances completely, giving Catherine an allowance but never letting her see their bank accounts. The way he'd make comments about her appearance after she gained weight from pregnancy. "You should really get back to the gym," Derek would say, looking at her critically. "It's been 6 months since you had the baby. That's more than enough time." Margaret wanted to say something, to protect her daughter, but Catherine seemed to be trying so hard to make the marriage work. And Derek was never cruel in front of Margaret, only when they were alone. As the years passed, Derek's career took off. He made partner at his firm by age 32, and his income jumped to over $500,000 a year. They moved from their modest apartment to a luxury condo in Manhattan. Derek bought expensive cars, wore custom suits, and joined exclusive clubs, but he never let Catherine touch the money. She still received an allowance, now more generous but still controlled. She had a credit card, but Derek reviewed every purchase, questioning anything he deemed unnecessary. $500 at Target? He'd say, looking at the statement. "What could you possibly need that cost $500? Emma needed new clothes. She's growing. And we needed household supplies. You need to be more careful with money, Catherine. Just because I make good money doesn't mean we can waste it." Meanwhile, Derek was spending thousands on golf club memberships, expensive dinners with clients, and a new BMW. But that was different, he'd explain. That was for work. That was an investment in his career. Catherine stopped arguing. It was easier to just accept the allowance, make it stretch, and avoid Derek's lectures about fiscal responsibility. She focused on Emma, on being a good mother, on maintaining their home exactly how Derek liked it. She also stayed close with her mother, talking on the phone daily, visiting Connecticut every few weeks. Margaret was still teaching, still living in the same modest house where Catherine grew up. She seemed content with her simple life, though Catherine sometimes worried about her mother living on a teacher's salary. "Mom, are you doing okay financially?" Catherine would ask. "Do you need help with anything?" "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart," Margaret would say with a mysterious smile. "Don't worry about me. I've been very careful with my money over the years." If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button. We share powerful stories like this every week, and your support means everything to us. When Catherine got pregnant with their second child, Derek's reaction was less enthusiasm than annoyance. "Again?" he said when she told him. "We already have Emma. I thought we agreed one was enough." "We never agreed on that," Catherine said quietly. "We always talked about having 2 or 3 children. That was before I understood how expensive kids are. Do you have any idea what Emma's private school costs? What about college? We need to be saving, not adding more expenses." But the pregnancy was a fact, and Derek eventually accepted it with the air of someone tolerating an inconvenience. He went back to working late, traveling constantly, and being largely absent from Catherine's life. Emma was excited about becoming a big sister. At 4 years old, she'd talk to Catherine's growing belly, telling the baby about all the things they'd do together. Margaret came to visit more frequently, helping Catherine through the pregnancy while Derek was often gone. Then, when Catherine was 6 months pregnant, Margaret had a stroke. Catherine got the call at 3 in the morning. Her mother had collapsed at home, was rushed to the hospital, and was in critical condition. Catherine drove to Connecticut immediately, leaving Emma with Derek. She spent 3 days at the hospital, holding her mother's hand, talking to doctors, praying for a miracle that never came. Margaret Ross died quietly on a Tuesday afternoon, with Catherine sitting beside her bed. She was 62 years old. Too young, too sudden, too unfair. Catherine was devastated. Her mother had been her rock, her support system, her best friend. The thought of raising this new baby without her mother to help, without her mother to call when Emma did something funny, without her mother's wise advice, it was almost unbearable. Derek came to the hospital after Margaret died. He stayed for an hour, made phone calls in the hallway about work, then told Catherine he had to get back to the city for an important meeting. "I'll see you at the funeral," he said, kissing her forehead perfunctorily. "I'm sorry about your mom." Then he left her there, alone in a hospital room with her mother's body, 6 months pregnant, trying to figure out how to plan a funeral. Share this story if you've ever felt completely alone despite being married. Sometimes the people closest to us are the most absent when we need them. The funeral was planned for Saturday, 4 days after Margaret's death. Catherine stayed in Connecticut at her mother's house, going through papers, calling relatives, making arrangements. Derek stayed in Manhattan, claiming he had urgent work that couldn't be postponed. Margaret's funeral was small but well attended. Students she'd taught over 30 years, fellow teachers, neighbors, friends from her church, they all came to pay respects to a woman who'd touched many lives quietly. Catherine stood beside the grave with 4-year-old Emma holding her hand. She was exhausted from grief, from pregnancy, from managing everything alone. Derek stood slightly apart from her, checking his phone periodically, looking impatient to leave. As the priest said final prayers, as the casket was lowered into the ground, Derek leaned close to Catherine and whispered, "We need to talk." After this, Catherine assumed it was about logistics, about when she'd be coming back to Manhattan. But as the other mourners started to disperse, offering Catherine final condolences, Derek pulled her aside to a quiet spot under a large oak tree. "I want a divorce," he said flatly. No preamble, no gentle lead-in. "I've met someone else. Her name is Melissa. She works at my firm. I'm in love with her, and I want to marry her." Catherine stared at him, not quite processing the words. "What?" "I want a divorce. I should have told you sooner, but with your mother dying, the timing was complicated. But I can't keep pretending. Melissa and I have been together for 6 months, and I want to be with her." "6 months?" Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "You've been cheating on me for 6 months? While I was pregnant with your child?" "I wasn't cheating," Derek said defensively. "I just developed feelings for someone else. These things happen, Catherine. People grow apart." "At my mother's funeral?" Catherine's voice rose, causing a few remaining mourners to glance over. "You're telling me this at my mother's funeral? Like I said, the timing is complicated, but I wanted to be honest with you." Emma tugged on Catherine's hand, sensing something was wrong. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Derek barely glanced at his daughter. Catherine, I'll give you 2 weeks to move out of the condo. You can take your personal things and Emma's things. Everything else stays. I'll have my lawyer contact you about custody arrangements and child support. 2 weeks? Catherine could barely breathe. I'm 6 months pregnant. My mother just died. And you're giving me 2 weeks to upend my entire life? That's more than fair, Derek said coldly. Legally, I could change the locks today. The condo is in my name. But I'm being generous giving you time to figure things out. Several people were watching now, including Margaret's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Morrison who had been Margaret's friend for decades. Patricia moved closer, her expression darkening as she overheard the conversation. You're divorcing her? Patricia said, her voice sharp. Today? At Margaret's funeral? This is a private conversation, Derek said irritably. Not anymore it isn't, Patricia replied. Catherine, we need to talk. The will reading is scheduled for 3 o'clock at my office. Your mother left very specific instructions, and you need to be there. Will reading. Derek perked up slightly. Margaret had a will? Of course she had a will, Patricia said, looking at him with disgust. And it's none of your business since you're apparently not family anymore. Let us know in the comments if you've ever seen someone show their true colors at the worst possible moment. Sometimes grief reveals who people really are. 3 hours later, Catherine sat in Patricia Morrison's law office, still in her black funeral dress, Emma coloring quietly in the corner. Patricia sat across from her with a thick folder of documents. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Patricia began. She swore me to secrecy about this for years. But now that she's gone, you need to know the truth about Margaret Ross. Catherine wiped her eyes, exhausted from crying. What truth? Your mother wasn't just a teacher, Catherine. Well, she was a teacher, but that wasn't her only source of income. Do you remember your father, even though he died when you were so young? Barely. I know he was a businessman. He died in a car accident when I was 5. He was more than a businessman. He was a tech entrepreneur in the early days of Silicon Valley. Before he died, he'd founded a small software company. After his death, your mother inherited his shares. She never sold them. Instead, she held on to them while the company grew. Catherine shook her head, confused. I don't understand. Mom lived in that same small house. She drove an old car. She worked as a teacher her whole life. Because she wanted to, Patricia said gently. Your mother loved teaching. She loved that simple life. But her investment in your father's company, which is now a major player in cybersecurity software, that investment has been growing for 32 years. Patricia opened the folder and pulled out a document. Catherine, your mother's estate is valued at approximately $500 million. The room spun. Catherine heard the number but couldn't process it. $500 million? That was impossible. That was the kind of money corporations had, not school teachers from Connecticut. That can't be right, Catherine whispered. It's right. Your mother had excellent financial advisors who she worked with discreetly for decades. She lived simply because she chose to. But she was building wealth the entire time. And she left all of it to you. Catherine looked down at the will, seeing her mother's signature at the bottom. Everything to Catherine Elizabeth Webb. The house, the investments, the stocks, all of it. $500 million. Why didn't she tell me? Catherine asked, tears streaming down her face again. Why did she keep this secret? She wanted to protect you, Patricia said. She said in her letters to me that she was afraid if people knew about the money, they'd treat you differently. They'd want things from you. She wanted you to have a normal life, to marry for love, to be valued for who you are and not what you had. She planned to tell you eventually, when the time was right. But she ran out of time, Catherine finished. Yes, and Catherine, there's one more thing. Your mother included a specific clause in the will. She was worried about Derek. She never trusted him, thought he was too focused on money and status. So, she specified that the inheritance is yours alone, protected from any marital claims. Derek has no legal right to any of it, even though you're still technically married. Catherine processed this information slowly. Her mother, who she'd worried about financially for years, had been secretly wealthy the entire time. Her mother, who'd seemed content in her modest life, had been protecting a fortune. Her mother, who'd warned her about Derek from the beginning, had made sure Derek couldn't touch a penny of it. And Derek had just asked for a divorce, not knowing any of this. He'd thrown away his marriage hours before discovering his wife was worth $500 million. The irony was so perfect, Catherine almost laughed. Almost. She was still too numb from grief and shock to laugh. What do I do now? Catherine asked. Now, you take some time to process this. You're inheriting not just money, but your father's legacy, your mother's wisdom, and complete financial security for you and your children. Your mother set everything up so the transition would be smooth. You have financial advisors ready to help you, lawyers to handle everything, and complete control over your future. Catherine looked at Emma, coloring happily, unaware that her life had just changed forever. And she thought about the baby growing inside her, who would never meet Grandma Margaret but would benefit from her foresight and protection. Does Derek know? Catherine asked. Not from me, Patricia said. And I'd suggest you wait to tell him. At least until after you've had time to process everything and make decisions about your future. Catherine nodded slowly. Derek wanted a divorce. Fine. He could have his divorce. But he was going to find out exactly what he'd given up in the process. If you're watching this and thinking about what happens next, make sure you're subscribed. The revenge in this story is absolutely perfect. Catherine returned to Manhattan that evening with Emma. Derek was at the condo, packing some of his things, preparing to move in with Melissa, his new girlfriend. How was the will reading? He asked casually, barely looking up from his packing. Did your mom leave you the house? Yes, Catherine said simply. She left me the house. Well, that's something at least. Small house in Connecticut, probably worth $200,000-300,000? You can sell it, put the money toward a place of your own. You'll need it since you'll be on your own soon. Catherine didn't correct him. She just watched him pack. This man she'd been married to for 8 years. This man who just asked for a divorce at her mother's funeral. This man who thought he knew everything. I've contacted my lawyer, Derek continued. We'll work out child support for Emma and the new baby. Obviously, it won't be much since you'll have primary custody and I have significant expenses. But I'll do what's legally required. How generous, Catherine said quietly. Derek caught her tone and frowned. Don't be bitter, Catherine. This is better for both of us. You'll find someone else eventually. Someone more your speed. Someone from your background. Someone from her background. Catherine understood what he meant. Someone not wealthy. Someone not important. Someone ordinary, like he'd always seen her. I'm going to stay with Melissa tonight, Derek said, zipping up his suitcase. I'll be back tomorrow for more of my things. And Catherine, please don't make this difficult. Don't drag things out or try to take me for everything. I'm being more than fair with you. After he left, Catherine sat in the silent condo with Emma sleeping in the next room. She pulled out the papers Patricia had given her, documents showing the full extent of her inheritance. $500 million, controlling shares in a major tech company, real estate holdings in 3 states, investment portfolios that generated millions in passive income annually. Her mother had been extraordinarily wealthy and had lived like she had nothing, all to protect Catherine. And now Derek was walking away, thinking he was leaving behind a soon-to-be struggling single mother with 2 kids and no prospects. Catherine made a decision. She wouldn't tell Derek about the money. Not yet. She'd let him think he'd won, that he'd traded up by leaving her for Melissa. She'd let him file for divorce, negotiate for the bare minimum in child support, walk away from their marriage thinking he'd escaped before Catherine became a burden. And then, after the divorce was final, after he'd signed away any claim to her assets, after he'd married Melissa and felt secure in his new life, only then would he find out what he'd given up. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine played the part Derek expected. She found a modest apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. She packed her things and Emma's things, leaving behind most of the furniture and household items. She didn't fight him on anything. Derek's lawyer sent over divorce papers proposing minimal child support, no alimony, and split custody that heavily favored Derek's schedule. Catherine signed everything without argument, which seemed to surprise Derek. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this, he said when they met to exchange paperwork. I was worried you'd be vindictive. I just want what's best for Emma and the baby, Catherine said truthfully. And what was best for them was Derek having no legal claim to their inheritance. The divorce was finalized quickly since they'd been married in New York and there were no major assets to dispute, or so Derek thought. Catherine got custody of Emma with Derek having visitation every other weekend. Child support was set at a modest amount based on Derek's claim that his expenses were quite high. 3 months after the funeral, 1 month after the divorce was final, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Michael, after her father. Derek came to the hospital briefly, met his son, then left to get back to work. Call me if you need anything, he said perfunctorily, though they both knew he didn't mean it. Her mother had been extraordinarily wealthy and had lived like she had nothing, all to protect Catherine. And now Derek was walking away, thinking he was leaving behind a soon-to-be struggling single mother with 2 kids and no prospects. Catherine made a decision. She wouldn't tell Derek about the money. Not yet. She'd let him think he'd won, that he'd traded up by leaving her for Melissa. She'd let him file for divorce, negotiate for the bare minimum in child support, walk away from their marriage thinking he'd escaped before Catherine became a burden. And then, after the divorce was final, after he'd signed away any claim to her assets, after he'd married Melissa and felt secure in his new life, only then would he find out what he'd given up. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine played the part Derek expected. She found a modest apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. She packed her things and Emma's things, leaving behind most of the furniture and household items. She didn't fight him on anything. Derek's lawyer sent over divorce papers proposing minimal child support, no alimony, and split custody that heavily favored Derek's schedule. Catherine signed everything without argument, which seemed to surprise Derek. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this," he said when they met to exchange paperwork. "I was worried you'd be vindictive." "I just want what's best for Emma and the baby," Catherine said truthfully. And what was best for them was Derek having no legal claim to their inheritance. The divorce was finalized quickly since they'd been married in New York and there were no major assets to dispute, or so Derek thought. Catherine got custody of Emma with Derek having visitation every other weekend. Child support was set at a modest amount based on Derek's claim that his expenses were quite high. 3 months after the funeral, 1 month after the divorce was final, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy she named Michael, after her father. Derek came to the hospital briefly, met his son, then left to get back to work. "Call me if you need anything," he said perfunctorily, though they both knew he didn't mean it. After Derek left, Catherine held baby Michael and felt overwhelming love for this tiny person who looked so much like her mother. She also felt relief. Her children were hers, completely hers, and Derek had signed away any claim to their inheritance before even knowing it existed. 2 months after Michael's birth, Catherine started making changes. She bought a beautiful house in Connecticut, not far from where her mother had lived. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was spacious, comfortable, and perfect for raising 2 children. She hired a good lawyer to manage her affairs and began learning about her new financial reality. She set up trust funds for Emma and Michael, ensured their futures were completely secure, and started exploring how to use her mother's money to make a difference in the world. She also began working with her mother's former students to establish the Margaret Ross Foundation, focused on supporting teachers and education initiatives. It felt right, honoring her mother's passion while using the money her father had earned to do good. Derek noticed Catherine's new house when he came to pick up Emma for his weekend visitation. "How did you afford this?" he asked, looking around at the property with obvious suspicion. "I had some savings," Catherine said vaguely, "and money from selling Mom's house." "This cost way more than $300,000, Derek pressed. "It's really none of your business anymore, Derek. We're divorced. Remember?" Her tone was pleasant, but Derek caught something in it. A confidence that hadn't been there before. A self-assurance that made him uncomfortable. "Catherine, if you inherited money from your mother, you're legally required to disclose it for child support calculations." "I'm aware of the law," Catherine said calmly. "And if there's anything that affects child support, my lawyer will handle it appropriately." Derek left with Emma, unsettled by the interaction. Something had changed about Catherine, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Let us know in the comments if you think Derek is starting to realize he made a mistake. The look on his face when he finds out the truth is priceless. Meanwhile, Derek's life with Melissa wasn't going quite as planned. Melissa, it turned out, was high maintenance in ways Catherine had never been. She wanted expensive vacations, designer clothes, a bigger apartment, a ring that cost more than Derek made in 3 months. "Your ex-wife lives in that big house, and we're stuck in this tiny condo?" Melissa would complain. "How is that fair? You're the one with a successful career." Derek was spending money faster than he could make it, trying to keep Melissa happy, trying to maintain the lifestyle he'd envisioned when he'd left Catherine. But child support payments, even modest ones, were cutting into his budget, and Melissa's demands weren't letting up. 4 months after the divorce, Derek got a call from his lawyer. "Derek, we need to talk about something. I've been contacted by Catherine's legal team regarding the financial disclosure you submitted during the divorce." "What about it?" "They're claiming you significantly understated your income and assets. They've hired forensic accountants who found evidence you hid money in offshore accounts and underreported your earnings. Catherine is suing for proper child support based on your actual income." Derek felt panic rising. "That's ridiculous. I disclosed everything." "Did you?" his lawyer asked pointedly. "Because if you lied on legal documents, that's fraud, Derek. You could face serious consequences." Derek hung up, his mind racing. He had hidden money, quite a bit of it actually. He'd been moving funds around, trying to minimize what Catherine could claim. But he'd been careful, or so he thought. How had she figured it out? The answer came 2 weeks later when Derek received a letter from Patricia Morrison, the lawyer who'd been handling Margaret Ross's estate. The letter was simple and devastating. "Dear Mr. Webb, you may be interested to know that Catherine Ross Webb is the sole beneficiary of the Margaret Ross estate, valued at approximately $500 million. This inheritance is protected by prenuptial-like clauses in the will and is not subject to any marital claims. Your ex-wife is one of the wealthiest women in Connecticut. You divorced her hours before learning this information. I thought you should know what you gave up. Sincerely, Patricia Morrison, Esquire." Derek read the letter 3 times, each reading making his stomach drop further. $500 million. Catherine had $500 million. And he'd divorced her, given her full custody of their children, accepted minimal child support, all while thinking she was a struggling single mother. He'd made the worst mistake of his life. Derek immediately called his lawyer. "I want to challenge the divorce settlement. Catherine has money, lots of money. We need to renegotiate." On what grounds? His lawyer asked. You filed for divorce. You proposed the settlement terms. Catherine signed everything you asked for. The divorce is final, Derek. There's nothing to renegotiate. But she hid her inheritance. Did she? Or did you never ask? Did you file for divorce before the will was even read? Because from what I'm seeing, Catherine inherited money after you'd already initiated divorce proceedings. She had no legal obligation to disclose something she didn't know about when you filed. Derek felt sick. There has to be something we can do. The only thing you can do is pay proper child support based on your actual income, which her lawyers are about to prove you understated. Derek, you're looking at significantly higher payments than what you originally agreed to. And if they can prove you committed fraud in your financial disclosures, you could face legal consequences beyond just higher child support. The forensic accountants Catherine hired were thorough. They found every account Derek had hidden, every asset he'd undervalued, every trick he'd used to minimize his apparent worth. When the new child support calculation was done, Derek was paying 10 times what he'd originally agreed to. Melissa was furious when she found out. You have to pay her how much? That's insane. We can't afford our lifestyle with those payments. I know, Derek said miserably. And your ex-wife is worth $500 million? Melissa's voice rose. Are you kidding me? You left her when she was about to inherit $500 million? I didn't know. You didn't know because you filed for divorce at her mother's funeral. What kind of person does that, Derek? What kind of person is that cruel? You didn't complain when I left her for you, Derek shot back. I didn't know you were leaving her for nothing. I thought you were trading up, not down. I'm not staying with someone who makes the stupidest decision in history and now we're paying for it literally. Melissa left him 3 weeks later. Derek was alone, paying enormous child support to his ex-wife who didn't need the money, living in a condo he could barely afford, and facing potential fraud charges. If you've made it this far in the story, please hit that like button and subscribe. The ending is even more satisfying than you think. 1 year after the divorce, Catherine was thriving. She'd fully stepped into her role as guardian of her mother's legacy. She'd expanded the Margaret Ross Foundation, built a beautiful life for her children, and found peace in ways she'd never experienced during her marriage to Derek. Emma was happy, adjusting well to the new normal. And baby Michael was growing quickly, surrounded by love and security. Catherine had also started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but she was open to finding real love someday, the kind built on honesty instead of ambition. Derek requested a meeting with Catherine one Saturday when he came to pick up Emma. Can we talk? He asked, looking older and more worn than she remembered. Catherine agreed, and they sat in her beautiful living room while Emma played upstairs. Derek looked around at the home Catherine had built, clearly calculating its value and torturing himself with what could have been. I made a mistake, Derek said finally. The biggest mistake of my life. Divorcing you was wrong. The timing was cruel. I was selfish and stupid, and I've regretted it every day since. Catherine waited, saying nothing. I know I can't undo what I did, Derek continued. But I was hoping, maybe, we could try again. For the kids. For what we used to have. What we used to have. Catherine repeated quietly. Derek, we never had anything real. You married me because I fit into your plan at the time. You controlled me financially, dismissed my opinions, made me feel small and worthless. And when you thought you found someone better, you threw me away at the lowest moment of my life. I know. And I'm sorry. You're not sorry you hurt me, Catherine interrupted. You're sorry you made a bad financial decision. You're sorry you divorced a woman who turned out to be worth $500 million. If my mother had been as poor as you assumed, you wouldn't be here right now. Derek couldn't deny it. His face said everything. I've learned something this past year, Catherine said. My mother lived simply not because she had to, but because she chose to. She valued things that mattered, education, kindness, authenticity, relationships built on real love, not money or status. She tried to teach me those values, but I didn't fully understand them until after she was gone. Catherine stood up. You can't buy back what you threw away, Derek. You're the father of my children, and I'll always respect that relationship. But you and me? That's over. It was over the moment you handed me divorce papers at my mother's grave. Derek left shortly after, knowing he'd lost something irreplaceable. Not just the money, though that haunted him daily, but the chance at a real family, real love, real partnership with someone who would have stood by him through anything if he'd just treated her with basic decency and respect. Catherine watched him drive away and felt nothing but relief. She'd grieved the marriage, grieved the man she'd thought Derek was, and moved on to build something better. 3 years after Margaret's death, Catherine stood at her mother's grave with Emma and Michael. It was Margaret's birthday, and they'd come to place flowers and tell her about their lives. Grandma would be proud of you, Mommy, Emma said, holding her little brother's hand. I hope so, Catherine replied. I'm trying to live the way she taught me. With integrity, with kindness, and with gratitude for what really matters. Michael, now 3 years old, looked up at the headstone. Grandma left us money? Yes, baby. Grandma left us a lot of things. Money is one of them. But more importantly, she left us lessons about how to live well, how to treat people, and what to value in life. Did Daddy know Grandma left money? Emma asked. At 7 years old, she was starting to understand more about her parents' divorce. No, Catherine said honestly. He didn't know. And by the time he found out, it was too late. He'd already decided he didn't want to be married to Mommy anymore. Was he sad when he found out? Emma asked. Very sad. But not for the right reasons. Grandma taught me that if someone only values you for what you have, they don't really value you at all. Emma thought about this. I think Daddy made a big mistake. He did, Catherine agreed. But his mistake gave us a chance to build a better life. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things. Daddy divorcing me hurt a lot, but it also freed me to become who I was meant to be. As they walked back to the car, Catherine thought about where she'd been 3 years ago, sobbing at this same grave while Derek handed her divorce papers. She thought about how lost she'd felt, how scared of the future, and she thought about where she was now, financially secure beyond measure, raising her children with love and intention, honoring her mother's legacy, and finally understanding what her mother had tried to teach her all along. Derek had thought he was trading up when he left Catherine for Melissa. He'd thought he was escaping before Catherine became a burden. He'd thought he was making a smart move. Instead, he'd walked away from $500 million, from 2 beautiful children, from a woman who would have loved him faithfully if he'd just been decent to her. He'd given up everything for nothing, lost it all at the exact moment he thought he was winning. That was the perfect revenge. Not Catherine doing anything to Derek, but Derek doing it all to himself. His own greed, his own cruelty, his own terrible timing, all of it had combined to create the most spectacular self-destruction imaginable. Thank you for watching this story. If it resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that karma is real and timing is everything. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and let us know what you would have done in Catherine's situation. Remember, people who value you only for what they think you can give them don't deserve to be in your life when you actually have something to give. Catherine's mother knew that. She protected her daughter from people like Derek, even from beyond the grave. And Derek? He spends every day living with the knowledge that he divorced a woman worth $500 million at her mother's funeral. That knowledge is worth more than any revenge Catherine could have planned. Sometimes the universe handles justice perfectly on its own.